Again, it's a rich thing.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you how to build a simple to-do app in Python with a graphical user interface. So we're going to have a simple GUI where we can add elements, we can remove elements, we can save the list, we can load the list, and so on. So I'm going to show you what this is going to look like in the end. I already coded this, and it's going to be a simple GUI like this, and we're going to have an empty list view in the beginning, and I'm going to click on this plus button, and we're going to add the to-do record video, for example. Then maybe clean room, then maybe go for a walk like that. And now I have my to-do list here. And what I can do is I can save it. So I can click here on File Save, and I can save it to a desktop, for example. I already have a file here, so I'm going to rename this to other to-dos.todo. And now I can also go ahead and remove a to-do because I'm done. So first of all, I can also click no to not delete it, and then I can also click yes to delete it. And now if I load the version before I removed it, so I load this file here, you can see it's back here. Now I can also delete it and then save the file. And then I'm going to save the changes, so I'm going to have the file now without clean room. And now I can remove something else, for example. I can load the old file, and you will see that it will get record video back, but it's going to still have removed clean room. So this is what we're going to build today, a very simple app for to-do list management. We're going to do this with PyQt5. I have a video already on PyQt5 on the very basics, how to install it, what it is, and so on. I'm not going to talk about the very basics here in this video, but still I'm going to explain everything I do, so I'm not going to expect from you guys to already understand each component and so on, but I'm not going to talk about the very basics, like what is PyQt5. In general, it's just a framework for building graphical user interfaces. So what we're going to use in order to design the graphical user interfaces, we're going to use the Qt designer. So for that, of course, you need to download it. And I opened the folder now. This is not what I wanted. I want to open up the Qt designer so we can drag and drop our graphical user interface. We're going to create a new main window, and it already comes with a menu bar. So we're going to type here and call this file. We're going to call this load, and we're going to call this save. And in the title or in the window itself, what we're going to do is we're going to have a list view. So this is an element that we haven't used yet on my channel. This is a list view. It's just, as the name says, a view for a list. So we're going to have a to-do list, and this list view is going to be able to display the list elements. So maybe like that. We should not go too much out of the boundaries. We're going to later on also fix the geometry because I don't want to make it responsive. It's too much of a hassle right now. We could use grid layouts and so on, but I'm just going to do it like that. And then we're going to add 2 push buttons. So we're going to have one button here, which is going to be with a plus. And we're going to copy it and have the same button with a minus. Maybe we can actually make this a little bit less wide, like that. And maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe like that. And then we, of course, need to resize the button. So let's delete this one. Let's make this a little bit larger. Like that. Okay, maybe a bit more. There you go. Now what we can do is, of course, we can leave the default names. So when we click on a button, you can see that the object name is push button, and this one is push button 2. I would recommend setting them to plus button, for example. And of course, we need to change the label here, and we're going to call this minus button. Those are the names that we're going to use to access these UI elements in Python then later on. And of course, we want to also change the font a little bit. So we're going to go to, where is it here? We're going to change the font size to, I don't know, 20. Maybe, yeah, 20 is fine. And for this, we're going to also go with 20. It looks a bit smaller, so let's go with 22. In the list view, we can leave it list view, and those should already have the right name: action load and action save. Alright, so the graphical user interface isn't too complicated. This is just a template that we're going to use. It has no functionality yet, so we're going to save it. And we're going to save it on the desktop as todo GUI.ui, for example. And once we have that, we can drag it into the PyCharm directory that we're working in. First of all, let's delete these to-dos. So I'm going to just drag this here to neural 9, which is the directory that I'm working in. And then we can start with the code. And for that, I'm going to have to look at my second monitor a couple of times because I always prepare the code and then I still 1 hour later look at it and don't understand what I did anymore. So first of all, of course, you want to install PyQt5. So you want to open up CMD or terminal on Linux, depending on your operating system, obviously. And you want to install pip install PyQt5 like that. This is what we're going to need in order to use Qt in Python, because Qt is not Python dependent. It's just a framework for graphical user interfaces, and we can use PyQt5 in order to work with that. So what we're going to do once it's installed is we're going to import from PyQt5. We're going to import from the Qt widgets basically everything, because it's too much of a hassle to import all the individual elements. It's just too much. However, I think it's more best practice if you import the individual elements that you use, but then the list is quite long. So we're going to just, for the sake of simplicity, import now the star. So everything, then from pyqt5.qtgui, import, and here we're going to need the Q font. For some reason, where did I use the Q font? I'm not even sure. I'm not sure if we're going to need it. I have imported it in a code. Maybe we're not going to need it. We're going to need the Q standard item model. This is very important because, and I think I'm going to block this with my camera right now, so let me just move it for a second. The Q standard item model is very important because it's going to be what we use in order to have some data structure that the list view can handle. Because to the list view, we cannot just pass a list, a Python list. We have to pass an item model containing the standard items. So what we're going to also import is Q standard item, and we're going to import from pyqt5 from pyqt5 import UIC. All right, so I'm going to move my camera back up there, even if it's blocking a bit, but you know now what the imports are. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new class, which is going to be the main window. So class myGUI is going to extend from Q main window, which should be a Qt widget. So it's already imported. And in here, we're going to have the init method, so the constructor. And this constructor is going to, first of all, call the super constructor. So we're going to say super myGUI self init. And then we're going to load the UI. So uic.loadUI, and we're going to load from the todo GUI.ui. So todo GUI, actually as a string, todo GUI.ui. And we're gonna pass self here so that the UI is loaded into the self object. And then we can play around with a couple of style things. So for example, in order to not be able to resize this, or maybe before we implement anything, we should just see what it looks like at the moment to see why it's necessary. So we're going to say app equals Q application with empty arguments. And the window is going to be myGUI. And then we're going to say app.exec underscore. And we should already be able to see a graphical user interface in a second, hopefully. Or did I miss something? I think I missed something. Of course I missed something. I need to call self.show. Otherwise the GUI is not going to show. There you go. So this is the graphical user interface. You can see it has no functionality. I can click whatever I want. Doesn't do anything. But what you can see is that I can resize it. So you can see that I can resize the GUI and it doesn't look very well or very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix the size. And for that, we should go to the Qt designer and see what the size is in the first place. And the geometry is 501 times 450. So let's go with 500 times 450, and we're going to do that here. So we're going to say self.set fixed size, and we're going to pass 500 and 450. And then we should not be able to resize this anymore. There you go. I cannot resize this. I should also not be able to maximize it. When I maximize it, it's just moved to the top left. There you go. So that's what we want. And now we can do a couple of other things. So we can just say self.set window title, for example. It's going to be to do app GUI, or let's call it Neural 9 Ultimate to do version 0.1 alpha, just to be one of those cool kids. And then what we need to do is we need to set up the model, because as I said, we cannot just use a Python list for the list view. We need to add, we need to use the Q standard item model. So we need to have specific objects for the Qt framework in order to have the list view, or in order for the list view to be able to display our items. And what we're going to do for this is we're going to say self.model is going to be a Q standard item model. So we're going to create a new model, and then we're going to set this to the list view. So we're going to go with self.listView, and we're going to set the model of the list view to be self.model. Now, if you have not worked with PyQt5 yet, you're going to wonder, okay, what is list view? We haven't defined it. But we use it. This is because we import it from the UI. By doing that, we can refer to the object name that we have here, so I can just access the list view even though I didn't create it in Python, because it's already created by loading the UI here. All right, so we have the model, and now we're going to implement the functions. Now we have 2 buttons and 2 file menu action buttons, so we need to bind them to functions, and for that we need to create a function. So we're going to have a function add to do with self. We're going to pass for now. We're going to have one remove to do. We're going to pass this one as well. Then we're going to have open file. And we're going to have load file. Actually save file. Like that. That's it. And now we're going to bind the individual buttons to these functions. So we're going to say self dot, we didn't call it push button, we call it plus button. Clicked, so we're going to bind to the clicked event. So self.plus button clicked. When it's clicked, connected to the self.add to do function. We're going to pass this as an entity, so we're not going to call the function. We don't do add to do like that. We pass it so that we know when the button is clicked, it's going to call self.add to do. We're going to do the same for the minus button and the remove to do function. And for the menu stuff, we need to use a different keyword. We're going to say self.actionLoad.triggered, not clicked, triggered.connect, self.open file. Now we're going to copy that, and the action is going to be action safe, and this is going to call save file. So by doing that, these buttons are now linked to these functions. We can see that this is the case if we just print add here, for example, and if I print open here, for example. How is that a color? Oh, this could be a color because of hacks. Okay, so I guess I should disable the color plugin. I already have a video, by the way, on my PyCharm setup. If you're interested, you can take a look at that. I don't like the color highlighter. I already mentioned that in the video, that I don't really use it that often. And that is one of the reasons why I don't use it, because add is a word, but it's also a hex code, so it displays this as black for some reason. Doesn't really matter. So now we have that. We're going to run this, and you're going to see that when I click the plus button, we're going to get add on a console, and if I press the load, we're going to get open. So these functions are linked, and all we need to do now is we need to implement the functionality, which is what this project is actually about. And an add to do is actually quite simple. All we need to do is we need to call an input dialog so that we can choose a name for the to do, and then we need to get whatever we get out of that dialog as a response and we're going to create a new standard item for Qt, so a Q standard item, and then we're going to add it to the model, and by adding it to the model, it's automatically going to be added to the list view. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the to do itself and the confirmed, because we want to also confirm it. Those are the two return values of the Q input dialog, and the Q input dialog is going to we're going to get from it the text, and what we pass here is first of all the title, then what we want to display, new to do, and we also want to have a Q line edit, which is a UI element, but we're going to add it to the input dialog, and we're going to have a normal Q line edit and then an empty string. And this is going to create an input dialog with this text and with this line edit, and then we're going to have to confirm it. When we confirm it, we're going to get the text and we're going to get it confirmed. So confirmed basically means we clicked OK. So if confirmed, so if we clicked OK and to do is, what was the function? Is actually not to do is space. So this basically checks if the string that we have is full of spaces and nothing else, because then basically it's empty. So if we don't have just spaces, and if we also confirm the dialog, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new to do. We're going to say item equals Q standard item, and we're going to pass it to do. So the to do is actually just a string. We get the text here. This is a string. We pass the string to the constructor of the Q standard item, creates a new item. All we need to do now is we need to add this item to the model. So self model append row, and we're going to add the item. And by doing that, it's also going to be visible in the UI list view. So we can already test that. Test. Okay, there you go. It's in here. Now test, cancel, didn't confirm, so it's not in there. Very simple stuff. Now the remove is actually also not that complicated. We need to do a check first. We need to say if the length of the self list view selected items. Now, why do we check for the length of the selected items? Because in order to remove something, we cannot just, we could also just pass some string, but it's not UI friendly, it's not user friendly. What we want to do is we want to select the item that we want to remove, and then we want to click remove. So we need to get the item that is selected. And in a list view, we can select items, and then they're going to be visible to us in the selected items, or by using the selected items function, we can enable selecting multiple items. So this is a collection. In our case, we're only allowed to select one item, so this is always going to have length 0 or 1. But in this case, we want to check that it's not 0, because if it's 0, we have a problem. So the length should not be 0. Otherwise, we're going to get an exception that we try to access something that doesn't exist. Because what we want to do is we want to get the selected item, which is self.listView.selectedItems, or actually selected indexes. And, oh, sorry, messed up the keywords here. Selected indexes is the word. So we have selected indexes. Those are the indices. I think, actually, isn't it called indices? I'm not sure. However, this is the index, the collection of the individual indexes or indices, whatever, of the individual elements. And if you want to remove something, you need to provide the index. And because of that, we need to get the index from here. Those are all the selected indexes, and we want to get the first one because we can only select one. This is going to be the selected item. Now, what we want to do in order to make sure that we don't accidentally remove items that we actually don't want to remove, we want to have a dialog that asks for yes or no. Are you sure that you want to remove that item? If you just want to remove it, all you need to do is you need to say self.model.remove row, and basically just select the .row. That's all you need to do, but we want to have a dialog to confirm here. So we're going to say dialog equals Q message box, not Q main window, Q message box. Then we're going to set the text of the dialog to be, do you really want to remove, and then plus. And here we need to provide selected.data. So in order to not confuse, I'm going to explain this again. So what we have is we have the list view, which is a UI element. we have this function selected indexes, and this is going to give us a list of the indexes that we have selected. Now, if we can select multiple, if we enable that option in the list view, this is going to be a collection that we can iterate through, and we can remove multiple items. In our case, we're only allowed to select one item, so it's always going to be the index 0 that is selected. And if the length of the selections is not 0, so if we have selected anything, otherwise it doesn't make sense to access anything. If we have selected something, we're going to get the selected object, the first one and the only one in our case. And by accessing the row function, we're going to get the row that we want to remove here. This is what we need to pass here. When we select the data, when we go for data, this is going to give us the content, so the text, essentially. Actually, we might want to make this... Oh, it already is an F string, so let's just do it like that. Remove selected dot data, like that. Maybe you want to give it some single quotations here and a question mark. All right, so dialog set text. Then we're going to add to buttons dialog dot add button, and we're going to add a queue push button with yes, which has the queue message box yes role, and we're going to copy that and do the same thing for no and a no role. So what's important to know is that if the user clicks the first button, we're going to get a return code of 0. If it clicks the second button, we're going to get a return value of 1. So if I go and say dialog.exec, I'm going to get a return value. And what we can do is we can say if this return value is 0, which stands for yes, we can just do that. And otherwise, we're just going to do nothing because the user canceled. So we're just going to do nothing, and we can already test this and see if it works. I can add something here. And now I can say no, nothing's going to happen. There you go. Now I can remove this. There you go. I cannot select multiple items here because I didn't enable that. I think if you want to enable it, there should be an option somewhere here in the list view. Not sure where it is. There's an option for that. I don't know where it is right now, but there's an option for enabling multiple selections. But this is how we do it for our project. So all we need to do now is we need to serialize the list and load it in again. The problem is that we cannot just pickle whatever we want. We cannot just serialize everything. We need to serialize something that is serializable. So we need to do, we cannot just go ahead and serialize the whole model. We need to serialize a Python list. And for that, we need to turn the model into a list, serialize it, then load it later on and turn it back into a model. And the first thing we want to do is we want to go for the save. So we want to save before we open. And for that, we're going to say that we want to create an item list out of the model. So we're going to create a new empty list. And we're going to say for x in range self.model.row count. So we're going to go through all the rows that we have, and we're going to essentially say item list.append self model item at that position.text. Because all we need actually is we need the text. We don't need anything but the text. We only want to have the text because that is the essence of the to-do. We don't care about any metadata. We only want to have the text and the order, but the order is going to be given by just iterating and then appending to the list and then loading from the list in the same order. So that's not really a difficult thing. So now what we have is we have a Python list, a basic Python list with strings that are essentially the to-dos. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new save file dialog. So we're going to say options equals new queue file dialog, or not new, but queue file dialog dot options, like that. And then the file name that we're going to save this in and a return value that we don't need is going to be returned by queue file dialog dot get save file name. So we're going to call a save file dialog and we're going to get the file name as a result. We're going to pass self here as a parent object. We're going to pass save file here as the title, an empty string here. And then we're going to specify the file types that we accept. We're going to accept only one file type, namely the to-do files. and they're going to have the ending .to do, like that. And then we need to pass the options. There you go. So as a result of that, we're going to get a file name. Now, all we need to check is if the file name is empty, because we can also abort, we can also cancel the file dialog, and this would result in an empty string. If the string is not empty, however, we're going to open up a new file, which is going to be the file name. We're going to write bytes as f. So we're going to write bytes because we don't just store strings, we store a list, and this is an object. And because of that, we want to serialize it, and we want to write the bytes of the list. And I think we didn't import pickle. We need to import pickle, obviously. And then we're just going to say pickle.dump the item list to the file stream. And this will result in the item list being serialized into the file name that we chose in the save file dialog. Nothing too complicated. All we need to do now in order to load this back into the program later on is we need to say, again, options. Actually, I think we can copy quite a lot here. So option is going to be that, and then we're going to say file name, and again the return value that we don't need equals qFileDialog dot get open file name. qFileDialog get open file name. Again, self here as a parameter, open file here, and empty string. Again, we only want to allow for to-do files. So files that are ending with anything .to do. And actually, I'm not sure if we need semicolons, because in the prepared code I have 2 semicolons. I don't think that those are necessary. And then we're going to have options equals options, like that. And again, we're going to check if the file name is empty. If it's not empty, we're going to open the file name that we chose in reading bytes mode, and we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to create a new item list, and this is going to be pickle.load. We're going to load whatever is in the file. Now we need to turn this back into a model, so we're going to say self.model is going to be q standard item model, and then we're going to say self.listView has to be set to that model, and then for item in item list, we're going to create a new standard item to add to the model. So we're going to turn this back into what we can use in Qt. So self.model.append row, and we're going to pass a Q standard item. So let's test it a final time, and then I'm going to go through the code and explain it one more time. So if you're confused, you're going to hopefully understand it. So we can add to-dos, we can do that, we can remove them, we can also not remove them, we can save this. So let's go to the desktop and call this whatever. Then, we can just close this, for example. We can open this up again, we can load from the desktop. There you go. So it works, of course. One thing that I didn't do here is I didn't set the font for the list view. Of course, you can just increase this by going to font and increasing the font size here, so it looks a little bit better, because in the prepared version you saw that you had a larger font size. This is nothing too complicated to do. It's very simple. So let's go one more time through the code to understand what's actually happening. We create the UI with the Qt Designer by using drag and drop. We load the UI, which means that we also have access to all these elements here. We set a window size to make it fixed. We set a title. We create a new standard item model, because that is what we need for the list view. We cannot just pass a Python list and then expect the list view to understand. We need to use this model here. We set the model on the list view. So we say list view. The content of the list view is going to be determined by that model. We link 4 functions to the buttons. So we just use the clicked and triggered event to connect to these functions here. And these functions have all the functionality. Then the add to do basically just opens up a dialog that gets some text. So we're actually calling the Q input dialog, asking for a new to do name. We're getting that name. If it was confirmed, we're going to create a new item from that string. So this is a string. We create a new item out of that string. We append this item to the model. We can then remove it again with a additional confirmation here. So we get the indices, we go to the list view, we get the selected indices or indexes. If it's not empty, we have selected something, we pick that element, we get the data to show, do you really want to remove this? We remove it by specifying the row, and those two functions basically just serialize. So this function serializes the list by creating an empty list and extracting the strings from the item model and then storing that. Then we can again load it and convert it back from strings to items. So to standard items. This is how you build a simple to-do app in Python. So that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video, and bye.